The gospel reading today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. And then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "Oh, you of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the reading of the word of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. The older I get, the more I enjoy Saturday mornings. Perhaps it's the quiet solitude that comes with being the first to rise, or maybe it's the unbounded joy of not having to be at work. Either way, the first few hours of a Saturday morning are most enjoyable. A few weeks ago, I was shuffling toward the back porch with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and the morning paper in the other. What began as a typical Saturday morning turned into one of those lessons that life seems to hand you from time to time. Let me tell you about it. I turned the volume up on my radio in order to listen to a Saturday morning talk show. I heard an older sounding man with a golden voice speaking. You know the kind. He sounded like he should be in the broadcast business himself. He was talking about 1,000 marbles with someone named Tom. I was intrigued and sat down to listen to what he had to say. "Well, Tom, it sure sounds like you're busy with your job," he said. "I'm sure they pay you well, but it's a shame you have to be away from home and your family so much. Hard to believe a young fellow should have to work 60 or 70 hours a week to make ends meet. Too bad you missed your daughter's dance recital." He continued, "Let me tell you something, Tom, something that has helped me keep a good perspective on my own priorities." And with that, he began to explain his theory of 1,000 marbles. You see, I sat down one day and I did a little arithmetic. The average person lives about 75 years. I know some live more and some live less, but on average, folks live about 75 years. Now then, I multiplied 75 times 52, and I came up with 3,900, which is the number of Saturdays the average person has in their entire lifetime. Now stick with me, Tom. I'm getting to the important part. It took me until I was 55 years old to think about all this in any detail, he went on. And by that time, I had lived through over 2,800 Saturdays. I got to thinking that if I lived to be 75, I only had about 1,000 of them left to enjoy. And so I went to a toy store and I bought every single marble they had, and I ended up having to visit 3 toy stores to round up 1,000 marbles. I took them home. I put them inside a large clear plastic container right here in my workshop next to the radio. Every Saturday since then, I have taken one marble out and thrown it away. I found that by watching the marbles diminish, I focused more on the really important things in my life. There is nothing like watching your time here on this earth run out to help get your priorities straight. Now, let me tell you one last thing before I sign off with you and take my lovely wife out for breakfast. This morning, I took the very last marble out of the container. I figure if I make it until next Saturday, then God has blessed me with a little extra time to be with my loved ones. It was nice to talk to you, Tom. I hope you spend more time with your family. And I hope to meet you again someday. Have a good morning. Well, you could have heard a pin drop when he finished. I guess he gave us all a lot to think about. I had planned to do some work this morning, then go to the gym, and instead I went upstairs, woke my wife up with a kiss and said, "Come on, honey, I'm taking you and the kids out to breakfast." "Well, what brought this on?" she asked with a smile. "Oh, nothing special," I said. "It's just been a long time since we spent a Saturday together with the kids. Hey, can we stop at a toy store while we're out? I need to buy some marbles." Our passage today is about walking on water. And usually when we preach about this passage, we're talking about overcoming fear, living in faith. We know those two things are opposites. But today we want to address another issue related to daily living. Before we do, I want you to think of all the images of water, okay? We use water for baptism. It's kind of a symbol of spiritual cleansing, maybe even spiritual sustenance. We also drink water for nourishment, and that gives us physical sustenance. There's times when we get to be near falling water. And I'll tell you, the sound of falling water is amazing. Rhonda and I are waterfall chasers. We like to do that. Our hiking has gone downhill in recent years, so we don't hike as much as we used to get to the waterfalls. But when we can get to them, we like to be near them. We love to hear the waterfall. I like to feel the spray on my face, the mist. It's something soothing about falling water. I also like still water. That few minutes just before dark when the lake has become absolutely calm and still and the water's like a mirror. That speaks to my soul just as much as falling water does. Or maybe it's water like in the passage that we read today. One time I was in Puerto Rico and there was a storm coming, and out behind the hotel that I was staying in, there was this jetty that went out into the Atlantic Ocean. And I remember the wind was howling and the surf was pounding, and it was pitch black dark. There were no lights whatsoever on this jetty. And I walked out to the end of the jetty, and the waves are pounding on the rocks, and the spray was coming up, and I could feel the spray from the pounding rocks. And I stood there in absolute pitch black darkness and just felt the power of that water, of those waves. Amazing experience. Water Sometimes we think about it illustrating the difference between fear and faith, this passage. Maybe it's more like a great dunk tank. If you've been to any of the fairs lately, you might have seen a dunk tank where the kids are tossing things at them, and a fireman or somebody else might be sitting on the seat, maybe a teacher. Yeah. And they like that a lot, you know. God's saying, believe fully in me or get wet. The title of the sermon today is The Art of Staying Dry. I've got 4 points I'd like to make about that. The first one is count your marbles. It might be something like appreciate each day of your life. This is from Psalm 39, verse 4. Show me, O Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Each person's life is but a breath. See, life is a gift. A gift that's given to us freely. It's a gift that's so important that we need to think more about the gift of life, more about gratefulness, less about pettiness and drivel. We need to figure out what is really important. I actually have in my head a series of sermons I want to write, and I don't have it all fleshed out yet. But it's based on the idea that God believes relationships are more important than theology or social understandings, you know. It's more important than ideology. And I'll just say briefly, because it's a little bit off topic of our sermon today, but it's something that's really eating at me right now. And that is that Jesus was criticized, you know, for eating with sinners, right? Because we don't associate with those kind of people. And yet, here we all are, right? Seated in the pews, and there are none perfect among us. God believes that relationships are more important. And we need to be able to set aside the pettiness, the drivel, the ideology, the theology, all these things that separate us. Because we need to not be separated. We need to live in relationship with God and with each other. And when we learn to do that, we'll find that our life is physically more healthy. We'll find that our life is spiritually more healthy. And you'll stay dry. Yeah. The second one is send the devil packing. Live in faith, not fear. In 1974, I was driving a Volkswagen Squareback. Anybody know what a Volkswagen Square? Oh, there's a few. Oh, yeah. I was driving a Volkswagen Squareback through the Austrian Alps. Now, it was a big occasion because I was stationed in Germany at the time, and both of my brothers and my sister had come to visit me. And I had taken a month off of work so that we could travel around Europe in my ancient, rusted out, multicolored Volkswagen Squareback. In fact, I had written to my grandmother to borrow, I had no money, to borrow $300 so that we could spend a month on the road with 5 people. Can you imagine? Yeah. Well, we were reaching the top of this Austrian pass, this pass in the Austrian Alps, and when we just crested the top of the mountain, all of a sudden the engine went bang, pop, 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 and I thought, oh no. I didn't have any money. There wasn't any such thing in my life anyway as credit cards in 1974. I've got a car full of people. The back end is packed so that you can't see anything out of it because we're camping as we go around Europe. And I just blew the engine on my car. At least that's what it sounded like. Bang. The good news was that I was on the downhill side. Yeah. So I shut the engine off. I didn't want to run it when it sounded so horrible, and I coasted. I actually coasted 18 kilometers down the side of that mountain. Every now and then I'd reach a place where you had to go uphill a little bit, and I'd start the engine and I'd go boop, 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 boop. It managed to get me up there, and down I'd coast for a few more kilometers. It was a Sunday afternoon when this happened. Now, you think things are closed here on Sunday afternoons? In Austria in 1974, there is nothing open. Nothing whatsoever. At least that was my experience. We coasted 18 kilometers down the side of this mountain through the twisty turns of the mountain road, and I came to a gas station which was open and had a mechanic on duty. It's impossible, but it happened. I walked in, and my German is pretty much non-existent. Yeah, terrible at best. And but with a lot of waving of hands and what have you, I was able to convey to the mechanic that I was having a problem, and would he come look at it? And he walked out. I don't know if you know, but these squarebacks were like miniature station wagons. And in order to access the engine, there was a hatch on the floor of the back, which I already told you was packed to the ceiling and to the walls and to the back of the seat and to the door with all the things that we needed for 5 people, to camp. So he came out, and I'm thinking I got to unload that car so that he can look at the engine. But he didn't. He just laid down on the ground, crawled underneath the car, looked up, and he started laughing. Laughing is a universal language. It sounds the same in German as it does in English. Yeah, kind of interesting. I thought there is nothing funny about this at all. I couldn't even begin to imagine what he was under there laughing about. So he motions for me to crawl under the car with him to look at what he was laughing about. And when I crawled under there, I found dangling on the end of a spark plug wire the spark plug. And the car was running. He had me started, and it was sitting there ticking away, tick, 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 tick. You could see the little arc on the spark plug. It wasn't in the cylinder. Turns out that I had taken it to the Volkswagen dealership before we took off. I had them check the whole car over so there wouldn't be any problem. They failed in one small area, apparently. They didn't tighten the spark plugs when they put them back in the cylinders. And so one of them had worked its way out, and that's why the car went pop, 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 pop every time it ran. And we screwed the spark plug back in, and the car ran fine. There was nothing else wrong with it. Have you ever been just so afraid of something that, like John was, walking out on the water, so scared that you sink? You see, we got to have some faith, don't we? It's the only thing that keeps us afloat. Listen to Isaiah 41:13. I, the Lord your God, will hold your right hand, saying to you, fear not, I will help you. The devil defeats us without doing anything except putting in our heads this worry and fear. Already, just because we're so scared, we're so afraid, we're already defeated, even when there's nothing wrong. We're so paralyzed with fear that we can't accomplish God's purpose for our lives. And then the devil wins. And we sink. And we get wet. Instead, believe that God is always there and that He always will be there. And then you'll stay dry. Number 3, get real. Get real, which means believe in God, trust Him. Ever feel defeated before you start? Yeah. We all have been through that, where we are defeated and we haven't even begun the project yet. For many years, I owned a company that manufactured X-ray machines. And I was asked to design an X-ray machine, and it was called reverse engineering. Okay, basically copying. All right, an X-ray machine. It was a dental panoramic X-ray machine, and this company in America wanted to make it, and they had one that they had purchased from Japan. And they asked me to copy that machine. So I had, 6 or 8 draftsmen sitting at drafting boards with pencils and rulers. Anybody remember those days? There was no CAD then, computer-aided design. We sat down and we drew every part and piece of that machine. One of the things that we needed for the machine was aluminum castings. These were called sand castings, and it's because the sand was the mold that the molten aluminum was poured into, and then after it cooled, the sand was broken away from it, and you had the casting, aluminum casting that you needed. So after we had the drawings all finished, I took the drawings to a company who makes aluminum castings, sand castings, and I handed them the drawing and I said, I would like a short run of these, like 100 of these castings. And I stood before the lead designer in that company, and he looked at the drawings, and he looked at them, and he looked at them. And after about 5 minutes, he said, it's impossible. Can't be made. I said, okay, fine. I walked outside to the trunk of my car and I got the Japanese casting in my hand. And I walked back in and I sat it down in front of him. And he said, oh. And then he started looking at the casting, and he looked at the drawing, and he looked at the casting, and he said, well, if we did this, and if we did that, and within about 30 minutes, in his head, he had every problem solved to make that casting. This is the casting that he told me was impossible to make. We do that all the time in our heads, don't we? Don't we look at a project or something that needs to be done and we say, that can't be done. It's impossible. And we just dismiss the idea. We walk away from it because it cannot be done. We're convinced. We tried it once, didn't work. That means it can't be done, right? We always have 100 reasons why it can't be done. And yet, somebody out there is probably going to do it because they don't have those presuppositions in their head that says it can't be done. When we decide that it can't be done, it's like John never having gotten out of the boat in the first place, right? He just sat there. He said, no, you can't walk on water. It's impossible. I'm not getting out of this boat. That would have been me. Yeah. I don't swim. Matthew 17:20 says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, move from here to another place, and it shall move, and nothing shall be impossible to you. Believe in God. He has equipped you for the task that He wants you to accomplish. Trust that He's done a good work in you. Trust Him, and then you will stay dry. And the last point is stretch your wings. There's something in our heads where we want to live in dualities. And I'm telling you, our day and age, right this time, is maybe the worst that I've ever seen it. There is no middle to anything. Everything is either right or wrong. Nothing in the middle, ever. Everything is either good or bad, nothing in the middle. Everything is either white or black, left or right, liberal or conservative. We have nobody in the middle anymore, if you listen to the rhetoric, that is. And yet the truth is, we're all somewhere in the middle, aren't we? Why do we feel like we have to take sides against each other? I struggle with that every single day. Why do we have to take sides against each other? God wants us to live in a relationship, and it's more important than anything else in our heads. Any ideology, any theology, any social construct, the relationships are more important. God made us to be in relationship. Stretch your wings. You know, my wife likes to garden. In fact, it's her therapy, her passion, dirty hands. I joke that I only see her bent over most of the summer. She just likes to be out there in the garden doing something as much as she possibly can. One of the things I've noticed about her gardening activities is that the garden is full of every color you can imagine. Those flowers come in all sizes, in all shapes, in all colors. God wasn't satisfied to just make red flowers, was He? God loves diversity. He likes all the colors of the rainbow. He likes all the shapes of the flowers. He likes all the aromas, the scents of those flowers. And they're all different. And they're all beautiful. Beautiful. Every single one. The next time you say you're between a rock and a hard place, have you heard that one? Yeah. That's our brains doing that to us. That's that duality. That isn't God. I can tell you right now, that is not God. Whenever you think there's only two choices and neither of them are any good, we've all said it, there's only two choices and neither of them are any good. Right? I've said it. I want to tell you something, and this is a little secret, all right? Don't tell anybody else. There's always a third choice. There's always a third choice. Not once in a while. There's always a third choice. Whenever you catch yourself in that dual mode where it's only this or this, if you just say to yourself, there's always a third choice, you'll think of one. I promise you, you'll think of one. And here's the crazy thing. When you think about that third choice, there'll be a fourth one, and then a fifth one, and then a sixth one. And suddenly you've opened your mind to all these things. And you know what? If you can't think of a third choice, if you honestly say, I just can't reach there, it's only two choices. That's it. Would you say a little prayer? Hey, God, open my eyes to the third choice. He always answers prayers like that. Always, always, always answers the prayers. Psalm 32:8, God says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you shall go. I will guide you with my eye. Let God guide you to the third choice. He'll point out all the other options, or at least the one he wants you to follow. Be open to the possibilities, to all the colors, and then you will stay dry. God bless.